Good morning, Mr. Aaron. How you doing?
Morning, Will. I'm good.
What's been
And
happening?
I'm going to talk about it midway through this episode, but
All right,
I'll give an update on what I'm up to once I get to the point where we've covered the investment principles relevant to it.
all right. Well, I've been good,
You've
and
been good?
yeah, a little jet lagged because I've been doing a lot of extra hours, but I'm doing well. I'm doing well. So this is investing four, is it?
Yep, investing four.
Investing four. All right. What's our first point of the day?
Today we're solving the money problem. This is the problem of not having enough money. We're going to talk about how to solve that. So this is quite a good one because this is the part of the course where we get to actually become rich.
Attempt to solve the problem of social money.
Yeah, well, it's good, because like at a certain point, you get enough money that you no longer have to worry about spending, a little bit here and there, and life kind of changes gears a little, which is pretty cool. And we're going to talk about how to get there today. So
Mm. We spoke
I
about
reckon we
this
should
last
just.
week with in
Oh
regards
yeah.
to friends and stuff. So it'd be good to be in that position.
All right. Okay. So first of all, I'd say that there's something I call the money problem. And that's when you lack the required resources to be able to make the choices that would allow for a unique and desirable path through life. Everyone kind of knows what that's like having things they want to do, but then you got to go to work.
Yeah.
And then you get stuck in that pattern for years and years. And, you realize all of a sudden 3 years have gone by and you haven't really done anything except go to work and head to the shops on the weekend. It's not really
Yeah.
like not really much of a life there.
It's not meaningful. You're kind of just chipping away at the hours and not really living up to what you want to be.
Yeah. And then that's one type of the money problem, but the other type of the money problem is when you don't even have enough money to on the weekend go to the shops. And that's the that's when money's like a serious problem. That level of in our society in Australia, poverty, like absolute poverty, is pretty rare.
Hmm.
Someone who can't afford to eat is very rare, but there are times when you can have the wrong combination of bills and maybe the little bit of hardship with getting the necessary hours and stuff like that, where you can have a quick dip into poverty and it's not much fun.
Nah, it's the will to death thing where you're like, yeah, I can save some money if I just don't eat this week. That way I can save enough money to buy, the car part so I can keep going to work. That kind of mentality.
Oh yeah, yeah, that happens all the time. It's an awful position to be in.
Mm.
It's also like when you're young, you're kind of resilient to that sort of stuff, but you don't want to be going into old age being unable to afford the things you need to live the day to day life that you want.
Yeah, absolutely not. Because your body starts to decline, and not only that, is usually you've pissed off enough people from not going to social events that you don't get the benefit of having people around you to help either. It's quite
Yeah, that
awful.
happens to people.
Yeah.
All right. So just to put us where we are currently, um, it used to be that you could work, save some money, put that money in the bank, and then the money in the bank would generate interest. And you could use that interest for either additional spending or make your money grow a bit quicker or like, you know, you, you could do anything with that money. But these days, the money in the bank doesn't grow quick enough to even outpace inflation. And even if it was growing quick enough to outpace inflation, it's still taxed anyway. So money
Yeah.
in the bank's become a very, very poor investment in the terms of generating income or keeping up with inflation. And what that means is that if you save 5 grand in 2022, by 2025, you may have $5,200 or whatever the interest will generate for you. But that $5,200 several years from now won't purchase what the 5 grand would have purchased in 2022.
So what you're
And that
saying
loss of,
is,
oh yeah, you go.
well, what you're saying is that you should spend your money now.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, unfortunately, that's the message that's being sent if you have a put money in the bank and watch it grow mentality, because all of that's kind of fallen away.
Hmm.
But there's plenty of good investments that can be made in the current economy that, you know, like anybody who's making a lot of money at the moment doesn't have it in the bank. It's like, it's as simple as that. There's
Hmm.
plenty of really good investments to make. And I'll lay out like, say, 4 strategies, and they're just strategies just to go from 0 to 1 million, because you kind of got to do that.
Yeah, you gotta be playing one set of rules, so that way you can at least, look forward to a little bit of retirement, or, a little bit of financial freedom, so you can do things that you want to.
Yeah, yeah, and some of these strategies too that I'm going to lay out, some of them are like a 20-year thing. Other ones, if you're in the right position for it, you can do it in like 3 years, and you
Hmm.
just have your $1 million in 3 years. It just depends on your current position and skill set.
Yeah.
I think just just to probably close the loop on the money in the bank point. So inflation currently, I don't know what it's at. It's really hard to get a good number on it. Here's the easiest way to say it. Money in the bank is generating something like a 2% return. Inflation is definitely a number higher than 2%, but you can borrow money for investment purposes at 2%. So if you borrow money and you go into debt, the value of your debt is slowly being eroded by inflation as time passes. So borrowing 500,000 today and then trying to pay it back over 10 years, by the time 10 years is like, by the time you're in year number 10, minimum wage might have grown from whatever it is now, 15 or whatever. Like, it might be $45 an hour is the minimum wage in 10 years. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know what the number will be, but the longer you hold big loans at the moment, the easier they are to pay back, provided that inflation keeps up at its current pace. So,
Hmm. Which is
the
really
other,
handy to know.
yeah, because there's an incentive not to keep your money in the bank, but to save some money, use it as collateral for a loan, borrow as much as you can, and then try to just hold on for dear life while inflation does some of the heavy lifting for you. It's like that's a perfectly viable strategy in our current situation. A lot of people are running that.
It's
Like, you hear
just
all the time about people with like 4 or 5 investment properties and they're $2 million in debt, and they're not worried. But
it's
that's why I think inflation will handle it.
it seems like that's what a lot of societies kind of want you to do. And like, it's weird because going through school, I might not have paid attention enough, but the becoming aware of inflation when we were speaking about it at work many years ago, I was so annoyed that there was a thing that was making my money not worth as much as it was every year. I thought that was really frustrating when I figured that out, and having that awareness just makes you want to invest because you're just sitting on nothing.
Mm. And here's the easiest way to understand inflation too is the more money they print, the more inflation there is. Now, it's complicated economics to understand it completely, but the way that the current numbers are sort of stacking up, they're printing so much money that you can use that basic model. Like,
Yeah.
I think the US printed 22 trillion since 2020. That may be wrong. That may be, but it doesn't matter. But the point is,
It's a large
22
number.
yeah, 22 trillion. That's 22,000 billion. 22,000 billion?
It sounds about right. Conversion's a bit scary.
Yeah,
What's his few zeros here and there and that and in those kind of figures?
yeah. Like, what is that? Is that like Is that like 22 million? I can't do the numbers on my head right now, but
Y-
the point is they've printed so much money, it ends up being something like 50 grand for every single US citizen.
Hmm.
And when $50,000 per person is created out of thin air, there's gonna be that's gonna be a dominant cause of effect in the economy.
Yeah, it'll flow out.
Yeah, definitely can't be ignored. So the way that the Federal Reserve and in Australia the Reserve Bank is currently doing their economic policy, you can look at how much money they're printing to get a little bit of an idea of how inflation's going to go.
Hmm.
Um, it's not a perfect thing because it's very complicated economics. Like no one knows exactly what's going to happen, but
Yeah.
so long as the strategy remains print lots of money, we're probably going to see lots of inflation. Simple enough to be, at least we can plan around that.
It feels like a really lazy strategy on the government's behalf, but I don't really know what other strategies they can run. But we should focus on us as individuals.
Yeah, yeah. I got a couple ideas what they could be doing, but we'll see. We'll see.
Yeah.
It's not even clear what they're doing. Honestly, it's very weird. All right, strategy one. So first strategy. This one's probably the most difficult. Let's just have a look here. Yeah, this one's probably the most difficult, but it's always got to be up front because this is the ideal one if you're in a position to do it, and it's entrepreneurship. So it's very good for someone who has high confidence, high energy, and they're highly adaptable to, instead of be working for someone else, start your own business and make money. Like if you're competent to do that, do it because you deserve the rewards that you're generating. You know, you should be the one being rewarded for your effort. Um, so a rough idea of how this sort of looks. One, attain a diploma, a trade, a degree in a personal field of interest. It doesn't. You don't have to do that. You just essentially become competent at something. That's what that's really a placeholder for.
Yeah.
Gain employment in the field and focus on developing your skill sets. And you got to really focus at it. Like every day you go to work and you focus and when problems emerge, you solve the problems. Like you don't just do the day-to-day tasks where so long as everything's functioning, these day-to-day tasks can be ticked off and then you get to go home. I mean, like you become competent in the sense of you do the day-to-day tasks, and if a problem emerges, you solve it, and that will get you really sharp. That'll get you really understanding what's going on in the industry that you're working in.
Plus,
Um, yep, you go, Will.
I was gonna say, plus it'll be very, very meaningful for the individual. Just on the sense of having your own business and having your own name on the line. It's like it matters then, you know? It's like unless you're a sociopath that doesn't really give a shit about humanity. But like when your name's on the line and you've got money coming in and your reputation's on the line if you're running a trade or running a cafe or something, it's like things actually matter. And it's like meaningful when you can do the job properly because your name's on the line.
Oh yeah.
There's like
I,
a
I'll just
mental health
I'll just
benefit.
clarify though. What I was talking about there though was like you gain employment in the field through someone else, and you start solving problems there initially,
Hmm.
so that you can gain that skill set before you go on and start your own business. Um, the third step, so you use your reputation to begin working for yourself once you're capable.
Yeah.
So two things will happen. One is you will become capable, and two, people will start asking you to use your skill set outside of the context of your organization. And that's when you get a little bit of weekend work, and maybe you can do it cheaper or better than you normally could, if because you don't have like the institution to sort of drag along. It's just you, and you're just doing the work that you're good at.
Plus, you get
And
a little
then
bit of that. You get a little bit of that revenue outside of your job. That is like the real money, because not only do you not have to pay taxes or anything like that, but you get to develop relationships separate from the business.
yeah, exactly. And you can make, I think it's like you can make 10 grand before you got to worry about taxes. So that's a pretty big boost in income.
Hmm.
Um, and as you build this reputation, just by doing like a little bit of extra work here and there, you'll find that before you even start the business, you can have customers lined up. That's a very good position for starting a business. It's very, very hard to have no customers, no products, no skills, and start a business. That's impossible. Once
Mm.
you've got your customers lined up, you're in a very, very, very good position. Um, Once you have more work, it's in number 4. Once you have more work than you can handle on your own, hire and train competent employees. If you are highly competent, then you will be able to identify competence in others. There's some weird psychological stuff that can be at play when that happens, like people get jealous and whatever, but I'm going to assume that you're just highly competent and your mind's in the right place here.
Plus, if
And
you're
then you got,
competent and
yeah,
you've worked in the industry, you'll be more reasonable to deal with.
yeah, well, exactly. It's often the case that people who can't identify competence in others, it's because their own competence has started to erode from inaction.
Yeah,
You see that a lot.
it's toxic.
So once you've got a handful of competent employees under your belt and the business is functioning well, um, the game here essentially becomes you got to keep the business alive by ensuring the work remains to a high standard. And my final point here is you want to grow the net profit of the business as much as you can. But once you reach the $250,000 point, so that's $5,000 profit a week, you should be able to sell this business for $1 million.
It's a pretty good
So,
deal.
yeah. And it's actually funny because if you're making $5,000 net profit a week, selling the business for $1 million, you might not even want to do that. I mean, maybe you want to get a big pile of cash and go somewhere else and do something, different. But that's the point anyway, with the way that businesses are valued, that it's worth about $1 million.
That's awesome. Like, at least it gives you a roadmap of meaning, a roadmap of skills, things to do. You know, seems
Yeah,
like the most
and
generic way to go.
yeah, and like hopefully, because I didn't use any industry specific words, so if when I said that you were thinking of how you could do it relevant to your skill set, like that's you. So maybe you've got the foundation in place already. A lot of the entrepreneurship stuff is just becoming stable to the point where you can take a shot at it without, going massively bankrupt if it fails. Like that's the hardest thing with entrepreneurship is you kind of want to have a little bit of a buffer to make sure that you can survive the early period.
Hmm.
Which is why it's not a very good first strategy to discuss, except for the fact that it's the most reliable one for competent people to be able to make their money with.
Most
And
applicable.
yeah, and like there's another element too where working in a specific industry and running a business are different skill sets. So just because you've got the skill set to be highly competent in the industry might not mean that you're capable of running a business. Like maybe having employees will just stress you the hell out and you won't know how to talk to them and deal with them. So, you've got to have two sets of skills here that often run a little bit counter, and then the actual managing a business kind of literature where they talk about how to run a business, a lot of it's trash. So
Yeah.
yeah,
And
yeah.
you,
So just
plus, you're better off learning as you go, like when you're in a field and stuff, because a lot of the managerial stuff doesn't apply to a lot of the trades, I find. Or at
yeah,
least it
doesn't
only
apply to a
applies in
lot of
part.
anything, man. It's all fucking, so much of it's just trash. Like
Oh, fucking hell, that's so funny.
I can't believe they get away with it. So
Yeah.
it's a good world for entrepreneurs if they're capable of making it happen. But you got to be capable of making it happen. Someone
Hmm.
hires you for a job, you got to get it done. That's really the main thing. And then getting paid and organizing the business structure and all that, different skill set. But if you're capable of being competent at one thing, you can probably be competent at another thing. So have at it.
Yeah. You have the skills for learning, and you have basically the mental fortitude to go through the hard times and the startup times, and et cetera, et cetera.
All right, I'll do strategy number 2 now. So property. Property's brilliant at the moment. I don't know if it's going to be brilliant for much longer, but it's brilliant. This one I put secondary because it's probably the easiest one to do, but it's only really easy if you're in a relationship and things are going relatively well. And that's difficult. Like, you can't, obviously, you can't start a relationship for the purposes of buying a house. Like, that's, so you've got to kind of have this other avenue of life running well before you can do this one, unless you are earning a very high income, in which case you can do it alone, but it's just a little bit more difficult.
Yeah.
Well, probably a lot more difficult. But
it's very restricting in the other things that you can do. That's for sure.
Yeah. So, speaking briefly about how to buy a property, I have a list here written up, and it will be in an article published with the podcast if anybody wants to see it. But so property, 1, attain employment, get a bit of excess income going, and save 10% of the property's value. So if houses are worth 50,000, 50,000. If houses are worth 500,000, you're going to want about 50,000 in cash. It'll take a year to save 50,000 in cash if you're saving at $1,000 a week, which is very unlikely. So you're really looking like for these early years, like with this deposit, you can be looking at 3 years of saving money, 4 years,
Yeah, it's definitely hard to get that initial lump sum of cash unless you're fucking spinning the pokies and hoping for the best, but I don't recommend that strategy.
Well, there are a few more. Like there's all sorts of like you can buy houses in a new housing estate, sometimes without a deposit. But essentially, what they do is they overcharge you for the house, and in the initial period of owning the home, the money you're paying off is essentially what you would have been saving had you saved the deposit. That's kind of the financial burden there. Now, it can be a good deal because you get the house straight away. But it can also be a bad deal because you overpay for a house and then you're in it for a little bit without actually getting ahead. But hey, whatever you need, like you got to have a place to live.
Yeah, especially if you're homeless, right?
Yeah.
Because things can be way worse than what they actually are.
I said save 10% of the property's value. Often you can go to a bank with 5% and they'll figure it out for you if the bank's looking to make a loan that day. Just sort of depends on what the lending restrictions are doing at the time. And those lending restrictions update very quickly these days. So if you've got 5% of the deposit, go speak to the bank, speak to a few banks. Like to get my first place, we spoke to like 10 banks. So, like, just go talk to them, find out what they're doing. And if they say no, either go speak to a different bank, speak to a mortgage broker, or come back in a few months. Just find out what's going on. Like, just keep talking to them.
Yeah, and eventually you'll find one sketchy bank, and they'll give you the money.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. That's kind of how this works.
Yeah, a bank that's starting up as an entrepreneurship that wants to be competent and will lend money to you.
And you can. So you want to get over that saving a deposit. Like if you're going to use property to build the majority of your wealth, you want to get over that initial saving a deposit period as quickly as possible because houses and apartments and whatever else, they're constantly appreciating in value in general. Sometimes there's a dip in the market, but in general, they're appreciating in value. And like last year in this area, they pretty much worldwide, they appreciated by about 20%.
Crazy stuff.
So if you were trying to save your deposit, you needed a 20% higher deposit after last year's property return. So, your 50 grand turned into what is that, like 60, whatever it is.
Yeah.
Um, which that's a real shame, because if you're saving at $200 a week, that's another year of saving.
Yeah,
Like,
it's brutal.
yeah, that's an awful rough deal. So you just want to get over this initial period as quickly as possible. So I don't know, live with as many roommates as you can, live with family. I don't know, date multiple people, whatever you got to do.
Oh no. Um, I did get one piece of advice from someone who owned a fair few properties a couple of years ago, and he said that if you can handle it, you should buy the worst property in the best street.
I've heard that before. My dad says that.
Yeah.
I did
And
see an article once saying that that's not true, but I don't see how.
I think it has worked. Well, it worked for me because I bought a 2-bedroom unit across the road from a shopping center next to a school, and that thing's skyrocketing in fucking returns. It's a ridiculous investment.
Yeah. And it's like, if you buy a, like, if you buy a house and add value to it by doing some sort of renovation or even just tidying things up, like, I I don't see how buying the worst house in the best street would not work, but whatever.
Yeah.
Read an article once saying it doesn't.
Well,
I don't really believe it.
it's like if you've got a good house, how good can you make it? If you've got a shit house, anything improves it.
Pretty much, yeah. Um. All right. So once you're owning property, the lean years of, like, when you're an entrepreneur, unless you have big success straight away, you're gonna have like some lean years. With property, currently there's not really the type of lean years that you'd expect. So first of all, mortgages are cheaper than rent. I think we've said that on every damn podcast we've done, but
Yeah.
and one day interest rates will rise and that will no longer be true. Like, the economy's done that many times. It'll just go in a bit of a cycle. But mortgage is cheaper than rent. And currently we're going through a bit of a property boom. I don't know how long it will continue. I wouldn't expect this asset class of global real estate to continue to put out above average returns for, like, an indefinite period of time. Like, we probably got 1 or 2 years of this at most before it starts to reverse.
Yeah.
You can already kind of feel it, because the currently, it seems like every single industry is in disarray and every single person is slowing down at work. So I don't know, probably won't be like this for much longer.
Nah, something weird will happen.
Yeah. But once you own a property, you can begin building equity. Equity is essentially, what you do is you take the valuation of your property, times it by 0.8. That'll give you 80% of that. And then you take that 80% of the value of your property and you minus from what's owing. And the difference is how much equity you have in the property. You can take that money, you can go to the bank and you can say, that's the valuation, this is how much equity I have, I want to borrow that in cash, and the bank just gives you that money. They don't even really, like, you don't even really have to tell them what it's for. You can do whatever you want with it. I know someone who got an equity loan to repair a car. Like,
Legends.
you kind of, yeah. As your properties go up in value, or your property goes up in value, you get access to, some people say, a line of credit with the bank. And essentially, the property market's performance can become kind of like a savings account for you, in the sense that you'll get money to access at a future date. You do need to pay it back, so it's more like a source of cheap loans, so line of credit. But interest rates, whatever, being at like 2%, it's a very cheap loan. A lot of other loans running a lot higher than 2% interest, so it's handy to have that available.
Yeah. Plus, it's not often that you have the setup for property in your lifetime the way that it is currently. So if you have enough money to get a deposit and to get a house, it's probably going to be beneficial for the next 2 years. And then after that, if things start to go up with the interest rates and the rates and stuff, it's like you're probably set, well, a little bit set off by the amount that you've been able to save in that time from owning the property anyway.
Yeah, there's definitely still money to be made.
Mm.
And on the long term, in like 30 years, houses are probably going to be $10 million or whatever. Like, that's not a guess. That's just a weird number I pulled out of my head. Like,
Yeah.
it's probably the case that in 30 years, you'll look back and think you should have bought a house. Unless something very major happens, in which case we probably got bigger problems. So,
Yeah.
like, maybe in 30 years, people look back and be like, remember when Australia was a thing? But
I
that
getcha.
happens with countries,
Yeah. Well, just to
Um,
remember on that, like on the comment of I should have bought a house 30 years ago thing, you only get that twice in your life at best. You only get to say
yeah,
that
right.
twice. So like, don't be in that position. Ugh. I don't know. Some reason that was really funny to me.
Yeah, that's good. Um, and you can use equity to purchase other properties. So when the property market went up 20% last year, everybody got the required equity in their property to purchase an additional property. This is something that isn't being spoken about enough, but let's say the bank's willing to accept a 5% deposit on a property. That means essentially everybody who owns a property had paid off 5% of their home because that's what their deposit was initially. Property prices then went up 20%. That means that now everyone with the new valuations had paid off 75% of their home at the new valuation. The value of their mortgage didn't change much because it was only what they paid off in that year. But because of the new valuations, the loan to value ratio shifted. And instead of owing 95% of the purchase price, it was now 75%. Or whatever the number was relevant to that person's particular mortgage. But the point is, everybody who owned a property had that initial 5% covered.
Which
So
it's bonkers, you know?
yeah, oh yeah, it's unreal. So every single homeowner got cashed up to the point where they could buy one additional property. And some of these homeowners already owned multiple properties. So if you already owned 3 properties, last year the property market gave you a return that would allow you to buy 3 more properties equivalent to what you already owned. And that's millions and millions of people. So now the property market's in a massive boom, and the money printing had an effect. So basically what happens is the government prints some money, it makes its way into the hands of like a general contractor or whoever it is. They buy a property, and because they're using new money, maybe they buy at a slightly higher price than anyone else was willing to pay, which kind of sends a signal to everyone in the street houses are worth slightly more than they were. And everybody who is selling a house is saying, well, I don't want what I would have got 6 months ago. I want the new price, the higher price. And because everybody starts listing their houses at higher and higher prices, and there's new money being printed, meaning that there's more and more people who can afford it because they're using money that was made out of thin air, the property market manages to climb a little. But once it climbs to a certain point, everybody who's got property already now gains access to equity loans so that they can also afford to buy at the new prices. And that's what's kind of sent this property market into this big spiral upwards, is once a little bit of money that was printed made its way into the property market, it set a cycle in motion that allowed everybody in the property market to access equity loans to buy more property.
It seems like the only thing that it changed was the fact that no one new can get in easily.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Eventually, everyone's going to have maxed out their debt. all the houses will be brought. No one will be willing to sell. We'll be waiting for them to build new ones, and this will slow down. And because there's millions of people doing this at once, it probably won't go for much longer. I don't see prices dropping massively, because if you bought a house for $700,000 and then a year later someone offers you 600, you don't say, "Oh, my house has gone down in value." You just say no to the sale.
Absolutely.
You just wait a little longer. So it'll probably be the case that all these property prices have gone up. There'll come a time where sales slow down, but the prices will probably stay roughly where they are.
Bonkers.
Anyway, that was a bit of a tangent, but the point is, the property market currently, it's in a very weird sort of time. It is in a bit of a boom, but despite that, it may have a little bit more to run. And independent of it, if it was in a boom now or if it was in a glut, like, you still want to become a homeowner at some point in the future, and likely you want to do it as soon as possible.
It's gonna ebb and flow anyway. Like, to keep
Yeah,
just to keep in
exactly.
mind, it's just like it ebbs and flows anyway.
And you can use once you're using equity to buy additional properties and stuff too, you can rent them out. And when you're renting properties, you can rent it for about what the mortgage cost, give or take a little. So one of the great things about property is it can become an income generating asset very easily. You just need to get someone to live in it.
Which isn't hard, especially at the moment. I've noticed a lot of people, like talking to me, have been saying that the rental crisis at the moment is ridiculous, which is sad and good, depending on where you are.
Oh
But,
yeah. It's a current hardship in the economy, and because it's a hardship, someone hopefully should organize things in such a way that they can they can provide what the people in that hardship need for a profit. That's the only reason someone outside of government will do it. And probably the solution to this problem, oh my God. Sorry, I just saw something I've been waiting on for ages. The solution to this problem is building more houses, but it's just going to take time.
yeah.
But once more houses are built, we'll have more housing supply. Rent can go down because landlords will have to compete to get a tenant in, because maybe we will have more houses than we have people looking to rent them. And to attract tenants, they'll have to lower the rents a little bit.
Yeah.
And if they overshoot the housing supply, we'll have vacant houses. That's bad for the economy, because now you've got landlords with these assets that are depreciating in value and not generating any income to keep themselves in repair. But if they get it about right, which hopefully they will, we'll have about the right amount of houses for people at a price that everyone's happy to pay. And by the time we get there, there'll be a different set of variables, and we'll need a different amount of houses. So
yeah,
that's how it goes.
It just moves on. It keeps ebbing and flowing.
Yeah. Probably the coolest thing with property, though. So over about 10 years, property has a habit of doubling. So if you buy a house for 500,000, usually in 10 years, you can sell it for about $1 million, give or take a few years or a little bit of money, whatever. You can essentially sell your property, pay off your loan. Well, hang on, let's do this two ways. It's easier to do the multi-property example. You buy two properties, one you live in, one you rent out. You wait for the one that you rent out to double in value, you sell it, and then you use the money to pay off both the investment property loan and your residential home loan. No mortgage anymore. You only own one property, but you own it outright. And by the time you've done it, it's probably going to be worth about $1 million. So we're back at $1 million again.
And then cha-ching, you're cashed up to do whatever you want.
Yeah. Yeah, it's probably going to be like I would do property as I was developing the skill set required to become an entrepreneur
Mm. Run
because
both
it'll give you
strategies.
yeah, it'll kind of give you like 10 years to get highly competent as well as build enough wealth that once it's time to become an entrepreneur, your expenses can be nice and low and you can have access to all that equity and hopefully you can figure out a way to make things work.
Make the world a better place. Well,
This
not.
one, then, yeah, well, exactly. Yeah. The next strategy, stocks. I used to love stocks, but at the moment, the market's insane. Um, but I'll do it anyway. So, stocks are great for people who are willing to trade volatility in their net worth for flexibility. That's because stocks can be bought and sold at any time. Stocks do tend to trend upwards on average,
Hmm.
but individual companies have a habit of going bankrupt.
Yeah.
This is the most annoying thing about the stock market is that sorry, I just had to do something real quick. The most annoying thing about the stock market is it's made out of individual companies. And I'm trying to think like Blockbuster used to be a big company, it was everywhere. And then all of a sudden it wasn't because there was a change in technology and now we no longer need video rental stores. Um, the, so many examples of what was once a big company that you'd kind of feel safe having your money in it goes out of business, often quite suddenly. And it can be really hard if you're an investor in a company like that because when Blockbuster went out of business or the video rental stores, it was tempting to hold on to the investment thinking that they would adapt to the new market. And it took all those companies so long to figure out a strategy to adapt that just about every single video rental store went out of business.
It's so sad.
Um, yeah, yeah, it's actually a real shame. We lost a little piece of culture there, but
Yeah. And then we got now we got like Netflix and stuff, so I would have been surprised if they could have navigated that at all.
yeah, it's really difficult for them. And one of the things that always annoys me is the video stores emerged. So did, the video stores had to compete with the emergence of Netflix. And the only thing I saw personally that had any chance was those Video Easy kiosks, and they're awful compared to Netflix. Like,
They're
do you know what I'm
also
talking about here?
yeah, yeah. They're
Maybe I should
also
explain it. I don't know if they're everywhere, but they're like a kiosk, like a post box, where you go and you press a button on a screen and you get a DVD, and then you got to bring it back to another kiosk at some time in the future.
dude, horrible. Even worse than the Blockbuster stores themselves. No
Yeah, yeah,
customer service.
yeah. Total step backwards, and it's like that was their response to Netflix. That's it's so it's such a poor response.
They probably could have got a better setup if they just did it via mail.
Well, that's what Netflix did originally. That's probably why they didn't do that. Was they didn't want to copy. Because the way that Netflix started was you would get a DVD in the mail, and yeah, you'd watch it, and then you'd send it back to Netflix.
Hmm. It's interesting.
Um, yeah, yeah. What was I going to say? Oh yeah, as an investor in like a company, say like Blockbuster, I don't even know if they were public back in the day, but doesn't matter. Um, if you heard an announcement, guess what? We've got an update coming. We've got a way to compete with Netflix. You might be like looking at your stocks, maybe they've gone down a little bit. You're thinking of selling because you're feeling like the writing's on the wall here. But then they announce, we got this, you know? You'd be like, all right, here they go. They're finally gonna do the right thing here. They got some big idea. And then they're like, it's like a post box for DVDs. By the time that you realize the strategy was no good, by the time it was announced,
Hmm.
You probably would have lost the majority of your money in the investment.
So sad.
Yeah, such a hassle, man. And then because you can't rely on the announcements from the companies themselves, you're stuck trying to guess. And that gives the stock market a real speculative kind of, uh, it's just an annoying way to invest money,
Yeah.
especially because at the moment, every damn stock is trading on a multiple that not only includes the current value of the company, but it also includes what investors guess the company will be worth in about 10 years. Like that's like literally the levels that a lot of companies are trading on. So
It,
you're stuck trying to guess whether or not you're buying this today. It represents good value compared to other companies. It's still very overpriced, and you got to try guess what the market will be doing at a point so far in the future that just it's just not worth it at the moment. It's too hard.
yeah, especially when you got other options on the table.
Yeah. For me with stocks at the moment, I'd wait for there to be a significant pullback and then I'd revisit it. Um, the other thing I got to address is because probably anybody who invests was thinking of it is index funds. So index funds allow you to buy shares in not one company, but every company on the market or a selected group of companies, depending on the particular fund that you're buying. But an index fund will give you, say, I think there's 1,500 publicly traded companies in Australia. An index fund gives you a small share in each one, and it's a weighted average. So if it's a big company, it gets a bigger share of your money. If it's a small company, it gets a small share. And depending on the size of the company, is how much money you have invested in it. Um, it's a good way to get around the problem that the stock market trends upwards over time, but individual companies tend to go out of business because every time a company begins to decline, the index fund slowly sells shares in it to match its new value until the point where it goes out of business. You've got so little exposure to it that it doesn't matter.
Hmm.
And then companies that are big and they're growing, you continue to buy shares as they're growing to take advantage of their good run.
Plus,
Um,
you get the you as you said before, you get the advantage of having your hands, like your fingers, in the pie without actually having a lot of the risk.
yeah,
In the old days, anyway.
yeah. Well, that's it. Because I used to really like index funds, but then there's the entire financial industry, the whole sector. There are fund managers, and their goal is to get an above average return. So a a investment class that offers the average return has become a little bit of a target for them to take advantage of, because if everyone can get access to the average, they're essentially worthless unless they can generate reliably above average returns, which they can't do by investing in the market reliably because it's very, very hard to invest in the market and get above average returns. So they've had to find a way to get themselves an edge.
Hmm.
And what they've figured out is that you can take a company that's an above average performing company, and instead of having it publicly traded, you can just keep it private.
So frustrating. I hated it
Yeah,
when you told me this.
yeah. So then you can keep essentially what you can do, you can get a group of sophisticated investors, you can pool the money together, and then you can have what's called a venture capital firm. You can make an investment in a company, and instead of ever letting it go public, you grow it massively, or rather the company grows because the people who are working there are doing a good job. But you make sure that there's enough money to keep it private all the way up to like a massive size so that you can get these above average returns all to yourself.
Fucking
Um,
assholes.
well, if I don't know, I'd do the same thing.
Like if you were an index fund manager, you'd do that.
Yeah, I'd make the switch to venture capital. And there is skill in identifying a good company to make an investment in.
Hmm.
But because there's increasingly, so it used to be if you're a private company, you'd reach a certain point where if you wanted to raise any more money, you'd have to get it from essentially the general public. And the way that you'd do that is by going public, and you'd sell the general public a small percentage ownership in the business, like i.e. a share, so that you could raise some money to do what it is that you want to do, usually scaling up.
Yeah.
But because venture capital, which venture capital used to just be for, like, you know, in the early days of a company, maybe they couldn't go public and they couldn't get a loan from a bank because they didn't exactly have a tried and true product. You'd have to go to venture capital to get a little bit of money so that you could do what it is that you want to do. Well, all that venture capital's done is, instead of just providing to little tiny companies, now they're providing to a lot of companies that are upwards of $1 billion. And that's essentially taken a lot of the really good investments off the table that the public could have accessed. And if you're fortunate enough to get a small company at, say, 50 million and ride it all the way up to $1 billion, like, you know, you make 20 times your money. They're essentially picking over all those now.
Yeah.
So those sorts of opportunities are probably disappearing.
Yeah, plus, if the index funds don't have access to that, then there's not really any use in getting them.
Yeah, essentially all you'll have is the big companies that are already public, and the small companies which venture capitalists passed on. So they're no longer the investment. It's no longer the investment class it once was, which is a little bit of a shame, but all good things come to an end.
Well, it might change in the future, but for now, it's how it is.
Yeah. And I mean, the other thing about the stock market too is just, it's very difficult. It's just so difficult.
Plus, you got to have a detachment from your money as well, which is really shit. Like,
Yeah,
you got to be like, I've spent 15 grand on stocks, and you just got to accept the fact that a lot of the time that money's just gonna, like, to have the mental mindset to do it, you basically got to say to yourself that money's gone. Like,
yeah, that's
to avoid jumping out of a
sounds like
building.
you're getting scammed. Like, if I said to you, you got to invest money in this and pretend you've already lost it, pretend it doesn't matter, you know, it's like, God,
Yeah.
you wouldn't make the investment. But that's what they're like with the stock market.
Well, it's like, if you care about it, you end up jumping out of a building in 2008.
Yeah,
You know?
exactly.
That's probably going to cancel us, but that's fine.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. All right. Stocks aside, we'll revisit that at a point in time when the market makes sense.
Yeah.
Strategy number 4. Actually, here we go. Let's just a quick thing on stocks again. If you can manage an 8% return and you can invest $400 a week, it'll take you 20 years to get to $1 million. Our other strategies have kind of seemed a little better.
It's kind of a position to be in when you have extra cash, like.
Yeah, extra cash, and you don't want any more properties or anything like that. Fair enough.
Yeah.
Okay. Number 4. This is a really, really cool one. It may be subject to individual laws and stuff in your area, so we just got to keep that in mind, but it does exist worldwide. It's just how it works specifically in your area. You'll just have to figure it out. This is called seller financing an existing business. So, you good?
No, I was gonna say, I remember when you found this idea out and you were so ecstatic about it. I'm keen.
Yeah, that was such a good one. So seller finance allows you to purchase 100% of a business, but only pay 60% of the purchase price up front. The remaining 40% is paid over the following few years, depending on the agreement. So this is This gets so cool so quick. There's a little bit of numbers here, but where we're at the moment, we own 100% of the business, but we've only put 60% of the price down in cash. Now, that 60% of the price that we put down, we're going to use equity from a home to borrow that 60%.
So there's no money involved at all, really.
No money. So long as you've already got enough equity to be able to borrow the money, you don't need to actually put down any money. But you're taking on risk.
Hmm.
That's what you're paying here. You're paying in risk. If that sounds like a good deal, you should really be thinking about it. Because
Well, you got to ask yourself: are you competent enough to run a McDonald's or something? Like, obviously, you
yeah,
can't buy a McDonald's, but you know, like a kebab shop or something that's more in the price range.
yeah. So we'll work on roughly 4 times earnings. So if a business is generating $125,000 in profit, ideally it would be worth around 500,000.
Hmm.
But these markets kind of fluctuate. Like sometimes a business is sometimes a business is easy to run, so you got to pay a little bit more for it. Sometimes it's very difficult to run and you can pay a little less. I would recommend that if the business is unprofitable, you should pass on the deal unless you know exactly what's wrong and how to fix it. But just remember, you're paying in risk here. Like,
Yeah, you got to be careful.
Now, because we're doing this seller finance style of deal, so you say, I'll give you 60% up front and I'll give you 10% over the next few years. If the seller is unwilling to do the deal, it may be the case that they're not sure that the business will still be generating a profit, 4 years later after you take it over.
It's a good insight into if they think, or from their experience, if they think you can do it.
Not only that, sometimes if someone's selling a business and they know they're selling at a certain time, they'll stop preparing for the long-term future of the business a little bit before then. Instead of replacing the equipment that's right on the edge of breaking, they say, oh, I hope that will hold out until I sell. Similar to what people do with used cars.
Yeah, I get you. There's like a little bit of corruption in there that you got to be ready for.
Yeah, there can be. Usually if you take over a business, you're going to find out that there was all sorts of problems that you were unaware of. And that's just how it goes.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, nothing's gonna work 100% of the time anyway. So
yeah.
be weird
And
not to think that it wouldn't be like that.
if the seller won't accept seller finance too, it may be the case that they're just being offered a better deal. Someone's walked in, they've offered 100% cash up front, walk in, walk out. Obviously they're going to take that deal rather than dealing with you and your little complicated situation here.
Yeah.
So if you can use seller finance to purchase a business that's already generating a profit and you don't pay the full price up front, like let's say the business is worth 500,000 and you pay 60% up front.
Mm.
What you do, you go to your bank and you say, I'm going to purchase a business. It's worth $500,000. I would like to get a $500,000 business loan.
Mm.
You've given 300,000, that's the 60%, to the seller. You're still left with $200,000 in cash.
Yeah.
So you've taken over this business. You've got $200,000 in cash from the moment you walk in. You should have brought a business that's generating a profit. So you've got cash coming in, you've got cash in your pocket. You should be in a relatively good position so long as you have the necessary skills Like, the high level of competence that's needed to be the guy on top who's taking all the risk. Guy or girl, sorry. I always I always picture myself. That's not sexism.
Yeah, you live the scenario, but like
Yeah.
plus $200,000 can fix a lot of corruption that's left in a business.
Yeah, well, that's it. If there is, some equipment that's on the edge of breaking or whatever, you'll have a little bit of cash to replace it. But here's one thing you can do with that $200,000. Maybe even if the equipment's good, you can update it to a new level of technology.
I
Um,
like that.
yeah,
Like that a lot.
sometimes the person who has the necessary skills and competence to run the business, i.e., take it over, knows about new technology. Often the person who's selling the business is retiring. Maybe they're not keeping up with the new technology because they want to go fish and spend time with their grandkids. Like hell yeah.
Enjoy life, like
Yeah.
they're done. They've run their strategy one of becoming competent. Now they want to indulge in the fruits of that labor.
Yep. And that $200,000 too can also be used to hire a competent person for a few years, or um, maybe you hire a few competent people and hopefully they start generating additional revenue and profit for the business very quickly. But the point is, you've got options.
Yeah.
That's a very scary one to do because you can essentially put your house on the line for the ability to take a business, take over someone else's problems, and potentially, you make it all work. And if you bought a business with $125,000 in revenue and you can grow that to $250,000, you've roughly doubled the value of the business.
Yeah. And then you can just
So
sell and move on.
exactly. That can be 500,000 to $1 million in a few years. Pretty easy to do if you're the right person at the right time, but you're taking on a lot of risk. So like you would not rush into anything like that. Um, and then my final point here on the strategies is these strategies are not exclusive. You can run multiples of these strategies at the same time.
Yeah.
However, your income, time, and energy will be major bottlenecks towards your progress.
Okay.
It's probably best to focus on one strategy at a time. And once that strategy kind of gets up and running and you no longer need to worry about it, you just start running an additional strategy. But don't just run the strategies for the sake of running the strategies. Run them within the context of your own life and your own skill set.
Yeah. And they're quite useful because a lot of the time, a lot of people are like, well, I don't really know what I want to do with my life, or I don't really know where I need to go. But if you've got less problems and you got some money in the bank, when you figure out that thing, you're better off having the money than not having the money.
So the final point I want to talk about here, this is just a little bit relating to the current economy, which I'm hoping will just, I think that there's an opportunity here for someone who's skilled, if they understand this, to be able to position themselves well. So I'll talk about an economic theory. It might be a political theory, actually, but it's called the Cantillon effect. Maybe it's Cantillon. I've not heard anyone say it out loud, but
All good.
So when they print money, it has a localized effect that spreads outwards.
Okay.
So let's say somebody who lives in a very, very, let's say a rich neighborhood. So the government's printed some money and they've hired that person's company to do some big infrastructure job or whatever with the printed money.
Yeah.
They become cashed up. Because they're cashed up, essentially, oh God, it's a little hard to make this clear. But they become cashed up from new money, meaning that there's more money in the neighborhood, meaning that there's they're going to the shops, maybe they're running renovations on their houses, they're spending more money in the local area, whatever it is.
Mm.
The point is the money flows into that neighborhood, and it can get this kind of like I spoke about before, with property prices increasing because one person had a little bit of additional money and they overpaid for a house, meaning that everyone started wanting everyone else to overpay.
Mm.
Money flows out into the economy like this when it's printed.
Mm.
It also does the same thing when there's an actual increase in productivity. Like, if there's a new industrial area and everyone in the industrial area is working on similar projects, and maybe they're able to take advantage of like each other's skills, and all the businesses are working with the other businesses such that the area is very productive, it'll generate a bit of wealth, and that area will increase in value, and it will continue to attract higher and higher quality businesses. Like, and then you get situations where maybe something like Silicon Valley emerges or whatever.
Yeah. Where there's like a hyper amount of kind of like resources in that area. And that's useful to
Yeah,
know.
yeah. It's like talent and skills all kind of flow to
Mm.
often concentrated geographic points,
Mm.
as does new money when it's printed.
Yeah.
So your closest capital city, you may be seeing 2022 prices. The stores will all reflect the year in their pricing. The property reflects the year in its pricing.
Mm.
Um, but then when you leave the capital city and you start to drive, instead of looking like 2022, it might start looking more like 1995. And
Sorry,
like
it's so weird. Yeah.
I know I've been doing a couple drives recently where I've been driving pretty far out of town, and there are some suburbs or small towns
Mm.
that look like things did in my childhood. Like
Mm.
the infrastructure, it's all old, and
Yeah.
it literally looks like I remember in 1998 traveling around where I currently live. I remember what it looked like, and then when you go to these small towns, it looks like it did back then. And
Mm.
then when you go to stores, um, often the stores have some quite cheap products, and like not everything's cheap, but if someone if someone's producing something locally in that area and selling it in that area, it's often at a price that you haven't seen for quite a few years if you live in the city.
Yeah.
And then other things like, you'll see new cars and stuff. Obviously, they don't sell cheaper, but that's because they're kind of flowing out of the city a little bit easier than the goods that are produced in these areas are able to kind of like flow into the city and capture those city prices.
Yeah.
Um,
It's because there's more economic movement in that area.
yeah. So if you can purchase a house in one of these areas, like there are places where houses are still selling for $80,000, which is insane because down in Sydney, houses are selling for $1 million. Here, they're selling for about 500, 600,000, and then 4 hours out of the city, they're selling for about 80,000 in some places.
Mm.
They're not they're not modern houses. You can buy modern houses in these places, and often it is the case that they're cheaper than if you brought close to the city, but it's not because the house is cheaper. It's still the same modern house. It's because the land is cheaper.
Yeah.
Um,
The access to economics around you is harder.
yeah. So it's like the modern house has flowed out of the city and landed on a block of land, far out of town, but it's retained its modern value.
Mm.
But the land, which is local, has not been able to capture city value because it can't flow out. Land stays where it is.
Yeah.
Technology, innovation, like modernism, it all kind of moves.
Yeah.
It's a tricky point to grasp, but this is where a lot of opportunity currently lies, because such huge amounts of money have been printed close to the city, in the city, and it is yet to reach these towns that are outside of the city. It's on its way. You got to move quick if you want to take advantage of it. But there's these price differences that somebody who's willing to take a little bit of a risk can take advantage of.
Yeah.
Now, I'll talk about my current strategy because it's quite funny. With the property price increases close to the city that I've been able to capture, I've been able to borrow the value of a block of land, a considerable sized block of land outside of here, in cash. I've been able to borrow 100% of the value against my house. And I just got that sitting in cash at the moment.
That's so bloody bizarre, man. But that's like some things that people only dream about. But in reality, you know, it's not hard to get there.
I'm literally shell shocked by it. But it's because this was my idea for like the long term, but because there was so much money printed, property returns, we essentially got 5 years of property returns or whatever all at once. So my plans got sped up a little.
Yeah.
But what will happen from here is once the right block of land pops up, I'll be able to buy it. I'll be able to own it. It will be secured against a house. And then when it comes time for me to sell the house, that will be able to pay for the house, the remaining money owing on the house, plus the block of land, plus probably a little bit of extra cash as well, which would be quite good.
Yeah. Plus, if you've got your land out there and you got $500,000 and you have the skills and requirements to build, agriculture and stuff out there, you're fucking sorted for the rest of your life. You got your work ahead of you. You got your pride and joy. You got some cash to get some tools and stuff. Like, you're sorted.
That's right, man. And I'm thrilled that things have gone like this and that I'll get the chance to have my shot at it. Because I'm hoping I can do it. Like, I reckon I can.
But, like, I think an important thing to bring up here is the fact that, it's not impossible. Because, like, where we work, it should be impossible to be able to have anything. But...
well, that's what some people think.
Yeah. Well, that's what resentment does,
Yeah. But anyway, the Cantillon effect. I didn't bring it up just to brag about the fact I've been able to take advantage of it thus far. I have an important point here. 2022 has been very, very inefficient, and the closer you go to the city, the worse it is. Something brewing there. And I don't know exactly what it is. It's a few things at once, but it's almost like there's widespread burnout from the pandemic, and people have just stopped caring about their jobs.
Sad.
Like try and ring anyone and buy something from them close to the city. They don't answer the fucking phone anymore. It's insane. They don't answer emails. Like...
Shithouse.
Part of the reason I borrowed the money for the land now was because the banks are getting so hard to deal with that I didn't want to wait. Like, I legitimately think that in, a few years' time, you may not be able to go to the branch of a bank and speak to someone and talk about getting a loan. I feel like they're going the way of the video stores. It's probably all going to be online, and people will say, how weird is it that there used to be an actual bank that you went to?
That's really sad. But
yeah, but seriously, go to those offices and speak to the people. They're not hiring the best people. I tried to get an appointment with the bank. I had to ring them so many times, and they would not answer the phone. And I don't mean the corporate office. I mean the local branch. Then I went there. I went there in person, went up to the counter, told the lady I want to speak to a lending advisor so I can get some damn money. It's I already have the property. I have the equity. It's just sign off on the damn thing.
Yeah. Just give it to me.
Like, I understand it's their money and that, it's their discretion on who to lend it to. But within the context of their current rules and regulations, I'm well in the clear to go and get a loan from them.
Yeah.
So I go to the receptionist. I tell her I want a loan. Actually, Morgan might have said it. She was with me. But point is, we say, we're here. We want to speak to a lending specialist. And she says, all right, yeah, well, I'll see what he's doing. The dude was available. We went and sat in his office and fucking organized the loan. Like,
The fuck?
that is insanity.
Yeah, it's annoying that they can't pick up the phone.
And you know what it would have been? He's a lending specialist. She's a receptionist. She had customers lined up at the counter every time I called, which I called many times across multiple days. He doesn't answer the reception phone because he's a lending specialist. It's not part of his role. But the dude was just chilling.
He's not getting connected with the work he needs, or what he should be doing.
Yeah, unbelievable that there's money ringing. Like, hello, we would like to borrow some of your money. We will pay you money for the privilege. And they're not even picking up the phone. And that's pretty standard.
That's crazy.
Yeah, dude,
Ridiculous.
those places are going under. It'll take them a little while because things don't go under quickly. But all of those branches will shut down because, like, first of all, why the hell I'm not just dealing with some sort of automated system similar to, like, I don't ring Netflix and tell them what movie I want to watch. They give me the list of options and I pick one.
Yeah.
Like that's what it's going to be in the future with these damn banks. But it's not just the banks. It's
a lot of things.
So many damn businesses are running like this at the moment. And the closer you go to the city, the worse it is.
Fucking hell.
And that is going to flow out of the city and across the country over the next few years. Like, I have a feeling the places where it's currently 1995, either one or two things is going to happen. The city people are all going to start leaving the city and they're going to rock up to these small town, local businesses, and they're going to say, hello, I'm a sophisticated city person. I would like a job here. And they're going to gum the whole place up.
Yeah.
Or the small town places are going to start out competing the big city places.
Yeah, because of competency and everything like that.
Yeah, I don't know which way it's going to go yet, and it's probably going to do one of those two things, depending on the specifics of the individual business.
Mm.
But there's opportunity here. For the first time ever, if you're outside of the city, you have an advantage in organization versus people who are in the city.
Yeah.
There's a lot of really interesting things happening there.
It's really bizarre at the moment. The world is very, very crazy.
And yeah, it's going to be. I feel like these are the big economic events of our time. One thing to notice: all the commodities are increasing in price at the moment.
Yeah.
So I got a note here. So this is also done by the same guy, the Cantillon guy. Different theory, but same guy doing the work here. The market price of a commodity fluctuates around its intrinsic value, which is given by the cost of production. So the cost of production is composed of land, labor, capital goods, and raw materials.
Yeah.
There's a lot of things that are being produced at the moment by big companies. The big companies are becoming so inefficient, it's unbelievable. Like, you can't get anything done by them.
Yeah.
Because they're so inefficient, they're taking on higher and higher labor costs, things like that. Like, they have all these different departments and no one in the department answers the phone and they say they're busy, so they keep hiring people and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I think that part of the reason all the commodity prices are becoming so much higher is because every single big company, who currently it's just big companies generating commodities, is becoming more inefficient.
It's really sad and annoying, but there's room for people to make a difference there.
Yeah, so an efficient small scale producer may be able to gain a financial edge. And eventually the big companies will become efficient again, and they'll wipe out the little producers. But at this point in time, I don't see them doing it for quite a while.
Or it could
Like,
cycle through that there's other bigger companies that emerge as well.
and here's another note too. So big producers have what they call economies of scale.
Yeah.
And all economies of scale is the bigger you get, the easier it is for you to do certain things. That's just going to do. I don't want to go into it because it's boring. But small producers, they can increase their quality relevant to the big producer, because as the big producer becomes bigger and bigger and bigger and more efficient, often they start making a product that instead of being as good as it could be, it's as good as it could be if you're doing 10 million of it.
Yeah. It gets
yeah, you go.
It's the depreciation in value because your eyes are everywhere.
Yeah, so I think that there'll be small producers who are able to produce high quality goods that, as these big producers are becoming more and more inefficient, and they're in general, they're sort of lower quality goods than what an artisan can produce, becomes more and more expensive. I think that there will be small producers producing high quality products at prices that are equivalent, that will be able to gain a financial edge. And I honestly think that this is the kind of thing that, within the context of our own skill sets, we should be thinking of taking advantage of.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's like the small game developers who make games that are rich in story versus the big game developers who make games that are rich in microtransactions.
Yeah, and animations and stuff.
Yeah.
Now this really does map onto the gaming industry really well, actually.
Yeah. And one more point here from Cantillon, and then I think we should probably finish up.
Yeah.
Cantillon describes an entrepreneur as an adventurer who invests in the purchase of goods and materials with the incentive of selling these in the future.
And
I kind of like the idea of thinking of yourself as an adventurer who's, going out there, and you're trying to navigate the uncertainties of time by looking at what you can get now and trying to speculate on what it will be worth in the future. I feel like the opportunities are great because in some places it's 2022, in some places it's 1995, and you can just arbitrage between the two.
Yeah.
And the people who used to do that are becoming really inefficient. So, future's bright, hopefully.
Yeah, I reckon it'll be good. Like, every time there's something negative, there's always a chance for people to, benefit society.
Find the opportunity in it. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's a good thing to point out because you focus on the negative stuff, but definitely focus on how you can improve it, because otherwise you're just being a useless fucker.
Yeah. Next week we might do a topic called dysfunction, and I might talk about every single thing that I've currently identified that's going wrong in the economy that someone needs to fix. Otherwise, it's going to be a massive catastrophe. But I'll have to look at the notes that I've got written up, because it may be the case that the world's falling apart quicker than I can write about it, which is so annoying. but currently I've got a massive list of things that's going wrong that someone's going to need to fix.
Yeah.
And often it's the case that a small scale producer will be able to gain the advantage on the big guy. But I just got to make sure that episode's up to scratch, because it's probably going to be a hard one to listen to, in that it's very scary to look at everything that's going wrong. But I'm hoping that at the very least, some people who have an ability to help will hear some of it, and they'll be able to turn what sounds bad into an opportunity.
Yeah. And that's a good skill to have in general. But that sounds like a pretty good place to leave it for today.
Yeah.
All right.
We did it.
Dude, that was a full-on episode. I hope you all enjoyed. Have a good one.